The wind howled across the barren battlefield of Arcticon, a chilling gust carrying the metallic scent of blood and the bitter tang of discharged weapons. Amid the snow-covered chaos, Commander Ashton Snow stood tall like a dark colossus, his obsidian armor gleaming under the eerie blue glow from his suit's seams. His breath, heavy and cold, puffed in the frigid air, eyes locked on the carnage around him, the bodies of his fallen enemies, the shattered remnants of an ambush. He had just led the Terran Special Forces in yet another brutal victory over the Arcticonians, their desperate resistance nothing more than a fleeting moment against humanity's advancing march. But as the last echo of gunfire faded, there was one survivor left alone, kneeling warrior, her sword planted in the blood-soaked snow, her pale lilac skin marred by bruises and cuts. With a shaky voice, the alien woman, her silver hair disheveled and eyes wide with terror, uttered words Ashton had never expected to hear on the battlefield. "Don't kill me, human. I'll warm your bed." Ashton froze. His finger hovered over the trigger, caught off guard by the unexpected plea. He had slaughtered countless enemies, but this was something different. His mind raced, the fierce warrior before him offering more than just surrender. She was offering her life for something else. The cold air between them thickened with tension, the gravity of her words settling in. The battlefield had gone silent, and in that moment, all eyes were on him. What would he do next? He could feel it. The weight of her gaze, no longer a defeated enemy, but a woman with a plan. Ashton narrowed his eyes, fighting back the confusion. "What did you say?" he demanded, his deep voice amplified by his helmet's speakers, a challenge in his tone. Her sapphire eyes met his, unflinching. "I am Kyla Thalarin, daughter of General Thalen. I choose to live, and I have skills that might be of use to you, much more than just another body on this battlefield." Ashton's mind churned with the implications of her words. A prisoner offering more than just a surrender? His weapon lowered slightly, not out of mercy, but curiosity. There was something about this alien warrior that defied everything he had been trained to believe. What had he just walked into? "Stand up," he ordered, his voice softer now, yet every bit as commanding. What came next would change the course of his mission and the war forever. The bitter wind howled through the cold, desolate battlefield, like the cries of the forsaken. The landscape, covered in a shroud of snow and death, felt suffocatingly silent after the carnage. The clash of weapons, the shrill screams, and the blinding flashes of energy now seemed distant memories, swallowed by the eerie quiet of victory. Commander Ashton Snow stood among the wreckage, a towering figure encased in obsidian armor, gleaming silver veins running down his suit like ancient, sacred markings. His every breath was visible, swirling in the frigid air as his sapphire eyes scanned the destruction around him, life reduced to nothing more than a frozen tableau of bodies, both human and alien. Ashton's focus fell upon her. Kyla. She was the last of the Arcticonian warriors still breathing. Kneeling on the frozen earth, her hands were pressed against the blood-stained snow, her body shuddering with exhaustion. A sword, still slick with blood, was planted in the snow, her only support as she trembled on the edge of collapse. Despite the visible wounds that marred her pale lilac skin, the bruises and cuts, there was an undeniable fierceness in her stance, a dignity that clung to her like a lifeline. Her silver hair, wild and disheveled, fell loosely around her shoulders, escaping the confines of her battle braid. The winds that cut through the battlefield seemed to find her vulnerability, but she remained unmoving, her eyes locked onto Ashton as if she were waiting for something, the final blow. Ashton's massive frame remained still. His rifle, a lethal piece of human engineering, hummed quietly in his hands, its barrel glowing faintly, ready to deliver death. His helmet's visor reflected the harshness of the world around them, his gaze unreadable beneath the layers of armor. A mechanical voice in his ear crackled with an update from Lieutenant Parker, his steady voice a contrast to the chaos that had unfolded. "All hostiles neutralized except for one. Awaiting your orders." Ashton's gloved finger hovered over the trigger, the weight of the moment pressing down upon him. A quiet tension hung in the air. He'd seen this before: battles, victories, enemies begging for mercy. But not like this. Not from her. The alien woman's gaze was unwavering, the terror in her sapphire eyes palpable, Yet there was something else, a calmness that defied the situation. A desperation, perhaps, or something deeper. "Don't kill me, human." Her voice, though shaky, had a strange serenity, as if the very words she spoke were as calculated as the way she held herself. The words echoed between them, floating on the icy wind like a confession, an admission of something neither of them fully understood. "I'll warm your bed." The sentence cut through the cold like a knife. Ashton froze, his finger halting in mid-air. His mind struggled to grasp the weight of her words. It wasn't a plea for mercy. It wasn't fear. It was an offer. One he'd never expected to hear from a defeated enemy, an alien warrior on the brink of death, making a claim that defied everything he knew. It was something primal, something intimate. He lowered his rifle ever so slightly, his gaze not leaving her. His mind raced, trying to piece together the meaning behind those words. What did she want from him? Was it a ploy, a final act of desperation, or something more? The alien woman, Kyla, steadied herself on the sword as she lifted her head slightly, meeting his eyes. Her words were quiet but filled with a strange, vulnerable confidence. "I am Kyla Thalarin, daughter of General Thalen. I have skills beyond battle, skills that could be of use to you." Her tone was laced with something else, resignation, yes, but also something unexpected, pragmatism. Ashton could sense the shift in the air, the change in her posture, and the subtle shift in the atmosphere around them. Her next words were deliberate, each syllable carrying weight. "I choose to live," she said, gripping her blood-soaked sword with renewed resolve. A bitter laugh escaped her lips, tinged with a taste of surrender and bitterness. "My father sent me to die as a distraction. I owe him nothing." Ashton's grip tightened on his rifle, his mind racing. He'd heard whispers of a fracture within the Arcticonian military, of leaders betraying their own kind for personal gain. But this was different. Something about her words felt too true, too calculated. He considered her for a long moment. She was still alive, and yet everything about her screamed of a warrior pushed to the edge of her humanity. And yet, there was something in her eyes, a flicker of intelligence, a spark of defiance that refused to be snuffed out. Kyla's gaze never wavered. She knew what was coming. She knew what the humans had done to her people. She understood that, in the grand scheme of things, one more dead Arcticonian would not matter. But here she was offering herself, her life, and a piece of her soul for a chance to survive. Ashton's voice, deep and amplified through his helmet speakers, broke the silence. "What did you say?" His words were more demand than inquiry, but his heart beat faster nonetheless. Kyla didn't flinch. She didn't waver. Instead, she lifted her sword, offering it to him, the tip just barely touching the snow beneath her. It was an offering of her life, an acknowledgement that her fate now lay in his hands. "My life is yours, human. Do with it what you will." Ashton's eyes flickered over Kyla, his rifle still lowered but his posture rigid. There was no mercy in his decision, but there was something more, curiosity. His gaze lingered on her trembling form, still kneeling in the snow, a warrior caught between survival and surrender. She wasn't begging for her life in the way he had expected. There was no frantic pleading, no desperation. She was simply offering herself, a strange piece in the wake of violence. He turned his head slightly toward Lieutenant Parker, his voice steady but with an edge of finality. "Take her to the shuttle. We're moving out." Kyla's body was a silent testament to the brutality of the battle. Her combat suit, once sleek and form-fitting, was now torn and bloodied. Despite the damage, there was an undeniable grace in her posture, as if she had made peace with the fact that her fate now rested in human hands. Her silvery hair, streaked with dirt and blood, clung to her face like a reminder of the war she had just fought and lost. The journey back to the Terran base was grimly silent. The shuttle hummed steadily, cutting through the biting winds of Arcticon's perpetual blizzards. Inside, the air was warm, perhaps too warm for Kyla, as she visibly shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Her lilac skin, which had always been cool to the touch, flushed with the heat that surrounded her. She pulled her arms closer to her body, trying to make herself as small as possible. Ashton watched her from the opposite side of the shuttle, his expression unreadable beneath his helmet. His eyes, though obscured, betrayed his thoughts. He had seen prisoners before, heard their pleas for mercy, but nothing quite like this. The alien woman Kyla was different. There was an unspoken language between them now, something that went beyond orders and protocol. He couldn't help but observe the way she reacted to the warmth. She was shivering, but it wasn't from the cold. It was as though her very body was rebelling against the warmth, a visceral discomfort that he had never witnessed in any of his other prisoners. Kyla's people must be adapted to the cold, Ashton thought. Her resistance to the human heat spoke volumes about her physiology, and a strange flicker of curiosity stirred within him. He had seen Arcticonians in battle, fierce and relentless, but he hadn't considered the small details: how they lived, how they survived. She caught his gaze and held it, her sapphire eyes revealing a vulnerability that he hadn't expected. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken questions. What was she thinking? Why had she chosen to live? Ashton, always the soldier, forced his thoughts back into professional territory. But something gnawed at him, something deeper than a duty to his mission. He couldn't help but wonder if there was more to her surrender than mere survival. With a soft sigh, he removed his helmet, the fresh air inside the shuttle cooling his face. He studied her for a long moment, his eyes narrowing with a flicker of understanding. "You're not used to this warmth, are you?" His voice was low, edged with something between curiosity and calculation. Kyla stiffened, and for a brief moment, she looked away. But then she nodded, her movements slow and deliberate. "No. My people, we're adapted to the cold," she murmured, her voice still betraying the tremors of exhaustion. "The heat, it feels intrusive. Intimate." Ashton's brows furrowed in confusion. He had seen his fair share of discomfort in battle, but this was something entirely different. Her words lingered in the air, rich with a cultural context he couldn't quite grasp. What did she mean by intimate? "Intimate?" he asked, his tone betraying his curiosity. Kyla glanced up at him, her eyes now flickering with something that resembled caution. She looked away again, as if searching for the right words, before speaking again, each syllable measured with the weight of tradition. "In my culture, warmth is more than just a survival need. It's a gift," she said softly. "To offer warmth, to share it, it's considered a sign of trust. A bond between two warriors. It's not just physical, human warmth. It's the warmth of understanding, of shared experience." Ashton blinked. He had fought countless battles on countless worlds, but never had a prisoner, an enemy, spoken to him in such a way. He leaned back in his seat, the hum of the shuttle's engine almost deafening in the silence that followed. Is that what she had meant? A cold shiver ran down his spine, not from the temperature, but from the strange understanding settling between them. She wasn't just offering surrender, she was offering something far more profound. Kyla caught his gaze again, this time a soft, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "You humans, you don't understand," she continued, her voice tinged with an emotion Ashton couldn't quite place. "Your warmth, it's just heat. But for us, it's more than that. It's a connection. A promise." For the first time, Ashton felt a flicker of hesitation. She had said it, a promise, as if her very life, her surrender, had become part of something larger than survival. He didn't know what to make of it, but one thing was certain: Kyla had just opened a door. A door he wasn't sure he was ready to walk through. The shuttle's hum continued, a constant backdrop to the heavy silence between them. Kyla sat across from Ashton, her body still tense from the unfamiliar warmth of the shuttle's interior. Her skin, typically cool to the touch, had flushed slightly in response to the temperature, a visible sign of her discomfort. Yet, despite the discomfort, there was something oddly graceful in the way she held herself. The tension in her posture was like a carefully controlled restraint, a warrior's pride that refused to break, even when surrounded by enemies. Ashton, now free from his helmet, studied her quietly. His eyes flickered over her torn combat suit, the silver strands of her hair tangled around her face like wisps of smoke in the wind. He couldn't shake the feeling that Kyla was more than just an alien prisoner. There was something else about her, something that made him question his own understanding of the war he was fighting. He shifted in his seat, watching as she adjusted herself, clearly uncomfortable with the heat, yet unwilling to show any sign of weakness. Finally, it was Kyla who broke the silence, her voice soft yet steady, as though she had been waiting for this moment. "You're wondering why I chose to live," she said, her eyes meeting his. Her voice, still laced with a soft tremor of fear, held a strange calm. There was no desperation, no pleading. Just the quiet certainty of someone who had accepted their fate, yet still clung to hope. Ashton didn't respond immediately, but his gaze never left her. The words she had spoken earlier, "I'll warm your bed," lingered in the air between them like an unspoken truth. There was so much more to her than a warrior who had been captured in battle. Ashton could feel the weight of her hidden depths, a layer of complexity that neither her kind nor his own could have predicted. Kyla's fingers brushed against the edge of her torn sleeve, the movement small but deliberate. She seemed to be contemplating her next words carefully, as if she were weighing the consequences of revealing more. After a long pause, she spoke again, her voice quieter now, as if the weight of her confession might make her vulnerable. "In our culture," she began, her eyes never leaving the floor, "offering warmth is a deeply intimate act. It's not just about survival. It's about trust. It's a connection between two beings, one that transcends physical need. It's a bond that can never be broken, once forged." Ashton felt the tension in the room shift, the air thickening around them. She wasn't just speaking about warmth in the physical sense anymore, she was talking about something much more profound. His mind raced to understand the implications of her words. A bond that transcends need. Was she telling him that she had just offered him something more than mere survival? More than just surrender? His mind struggled to make sense of her words. Was it an act of manipulation? A warrior's final card to play in a desperate attempt to survive? Or was it something else, something deeper, more genuine? Ashton shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Despite the calculated way she had presented herself, he could sense a shift in Kyla. The cracks in her armor were beginning to show subtle hints of vulnerability that she couldn't hide, no matter how she tried. Her proud posture remained, but there was a fragility beneath it, a wariness that Ashton couldn't ignore. She wasn't just an enemy anymore. She was a person. A person caught in a war that had torn her apart just as much as it had torn his people. "You speak of bonds," Ashton said slowly, his voice low, filled with curiosity. "But how can I trust you? After everything I've seen, everything your people have done. Why should I believe this isn't just another tactic? Another game to play?" Kyla's gaze shifted, her eyes narrowing slightly as if weighing his words carefully. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The shuttle's hum, the subtle vibrations of the engines, filled the silence, and yet it only heightened the tension between them. The atmosphere seemed to press in on them, thick with unspoken emotions, doubts, and questions. Finally, she lifted her chin slightly, a small, faint smile curling at the edges of her lips, a smile that was more resigned than anything else. "Because I'm offering something that no one else would." Her voice was soft, but there was an unmistakable edge of truth in it. "I'm not your enemy anymore, Commander Snow. You've already made your decision. You spared my life. But there is more to this war than the battlefield. And there is more to me than just a soldier who was sent to die." Ashton was taken aback. More to her than just a soldier? Her words resonated with him in a way he hadn't expected. He had seen many soldiers fight for their lives, for their cause, but this felt different. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It wasn't about her people's war, or his people's march across the stars. There was something more here, a connection that neither he nor she could deny. Her words hit him like a wave, washing away some of the cold distrust he had buried deep within himself. He couldn't fully trust her, not yet. But he understood that he couldn't simply dismiss her either. Kyla was more than a mere alien prisoner. She was someone caught in the same web of violence and betrayal. She was someone who had lived through the same horrors, the same impossible choices, and yet here she was offering him a bond that neither of them fully understood. Ashton's gaze softened, just slightly, as he met her eyes again. For the first time, he wasn't looking at her as an enemy. He was looking at her as a person. Someone who might just be more valuable to him than the information she could offer. "And what about you?" he asked quietly. "What do you want from me?" Kyla hesitated for a moment, a flicker of something passing through her eyes, something almost human. "I want you to understand," she said softly. "I'm not just here to fight. I'm here because I believe there's something more. Something better than this endless cycle of violence. I want to show you that it's possible for us to end this war together." The words hung between them, a fragile thread that neither of them was willing to sever just yet. Their cultural differences were vast, their histories intertwined with bloodshed and hatred. And yet, in this moment, they both understood something deeper, something that was not defined by their past, but by the choices they were about to make. Ashton's heart pounded in his chest as the shuttle continued its journey toward the Terran base. He wasn't sure what the future held. But for the first time, he felt as though he might be looking at it with someone who could change everything. The shuttle touched down at the Terran base with a low thud, its engines winding down with a mechanical hiss. The door slid open, revealing the sterile, white walls of the base's interior, a stark contrast to the violent, blood-soaked landscape of Arcticon outside. Ashton, still silent and brooding, led the way, his footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. Behind him, Kyla followed, her head lowered, her wrists bound in energy cuffs. The soft glow of the fluorescent lights above cast an almost clinical pallor on her already pale skin, intensifying the sense of isolation between them. They reached a small briefing room. The air inside was cool, almost cold, with the hum of machinery and distant chatter filling the space. Kyla sat first, her posture rigid, eyes darting warily around the room. Ashton remained standing for a moment, watching her closely as if expecting something to shift, a misstep that would confirm his doubts. But she remained composed, a quiet tension hanging between them. Ashton finally took a seat across from her, his eyes never leaving her face. Kyla, sensing his scrutiny, shifted slightly in her seat, the cuffs on her wrists pulling at the fabric of her torn suit. She knew he didn't trust her, he hadn't for a moment. But she had made a decision, and there was no going back now. The risk was too great, the stakes too high. "You say you have valuable intelligence about the Arcticonian defenses," Ashton began, his voice measured, as though each word was calculated. "But you haven't explained why I should believe a word you say." Kyla's eyes flickered, a flash of something unreadable crossing her features. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, then spoke. Her voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of urgency in it that Ashton couldn't ignore. "Because I'm offering you the truth," she said softly. "I'm not a prisoner of war, Commander. I'm someone who sees the end of this conflict, and I know it's coming." Ashton's brow furrowed. He had expected to hear a story of survival, of desperation. Instead, Kyla spoke as though the end of this war were an inevitability, something already decided. "The defenses on the Eastern Front are weak," she continued, leaning forward, her voice lowering to a near whisper. "We're stretched thin. Our forces are divided. The Arcticonian military is splintering. The question isn't if we'll lose, it's when." Ashton listened intently, his eyes narrowing as he processed her words. He had always known the Arcticonian forces were on the verge of collapse, but hearing it from the enemy from her felt different. It should have given him a sense of victory, but instead, a gnawing sense of doubt lingered in the back of his mind. "And why are you telling me this?" he asked, his voice sharp, almost dismissive. "You expect me to trust your information? After everything?" Kyla's expression hardened, the hint of vulnerability from earlier replaced by something steely, determined. She sat back in her seat, her sapphire eyes locking onto his, unflinching. Because I want peace, she said simply. The war benefits no one. Not your people. Not mine. The words hung in the air, their weight settling over Ashton like a storm cloud. Peace? The very idea felt foreign, almost absurd, in the context of everything he had seen. He had fought for so long, for so many worlds, that peace seemed like a distant fantasy. Peace? Ashton repeated, his voice laced with disbelief. You expect me to believe that after everything that's happened? You think humans and Arcticonians can just stop fighting? Just like that? Kyla's gaze softened, a fleeting trace of sorrow crossing her features. I know it sounds impossible, she said quietly. But I've seen the destruction. The loss. And I know my people, they are desperate. My father, he sent us to die. He's not the only one in my military who thinks the war is futile. There are others who want to end it, too. We just need to reach them before it's too late. Ashton shifted in his seat, his arms folding across his chest, the weight of her words pressing against his ribs. He didn't trust her, not completely. But there was something about her, something that made him wonder. Could she really be telling the truth? Could there be a way to end this war without more bloodshed? And you think you can convince your people to stop fighting? Ashton asked, his voice quieter now, probing. He didn't expect an answer, but Kyla met his gaze without hesitation. Yes, she replied, her voice unwavering. If we can reach the right people, those who still have the will to change, we can stop this. Ashton leaned forward slightly, his fingers tapping idly against the metal table, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. She spoke with such conviction. Too much conviction, he thought. But there was no denying the intensity in her eyes, the belief that burned within her words. And yet, he couldn't shake the doubt that clung to him. Was she manipulating him? Was she playing some long game, working to further the goals of her people? Or was there truth to her words? You want peace, he said slowly, each word deliberate, but you're still a soldier. You're still part of the army that's been fighting against us. Why should I believe that your offer is genuine? That you're not just using me? Kyla's eyes hardened once more, but her voice remained calm, almost soothing. I'm not using you, Commander Snow. I'm offering you a way out for both of us. For all of us. The tension between them grew thick, their cultural differences colliding with their personal beliefs. Ashton's mind raced, his emotions torn between the cold, logical warrior he had always been and the growing pull of something deeper, something he couldn't quite name. Kyla's presence, her words, had gotten under his skin in a way he hadn't anticipated. He could still feel the weight of her gaze, the intensity of the moment they shared on the battlefield, when everything had changed. And yet, there was still so much he didn't understand. Was she sincere? Or was this all just another manipulation, a ploy to save herself, to secure her people's survival at any cost? The silence stretched between them, thick with uncertainty. Ashton knew that whatever decision he made next could change everything. But he wasn't ready to make that decision, not yet. He needed more. He needed to know the truth. You talk about peace, Ashton said slowly, his voice taking on a darker edge. But I don't think you're being completely honest with me, Kyla. I think there's more you're not telling me. And I'm going to find out what it is. Kyla didn't flinch. Instead, she gave him a small, almost sad smile, as though she had expected his suspicion all along. I understand, she said softly. But I'll tell you this, if you truly want to end this war, Commander Snow, you'll have to trust me. The words echoed in Ashton's mind, a challenge he couldn't ignore. The possibility of peace, a strange, unfamiliar concept, dangled in front of him like a tantalizing, unreachable prize. But there were too many shadows, too many questions yet unanswered. And so, as the weight of the decision pressed upon him, Ashton stood, his eyes locking with Kyla's one final time before he turned away. We'll see about that, he muttered. The sterile lights of the command center flickered overhead as Ashton entered, his boots echoing against the metal floors. The low hum of the base's engines reverberated through the walls, the only sound that broke the silence in this stark, clinical environment. Commander Snow's posture was stiff, his mind already grappling with the orders he had just received. General Winters was seated at the far end of the room, her eyes hard and calculating. She didn't look up as he entered but gestured toward a chair at the opposite end of the table. Ashton hesitated for a moment before sitting, the weight of her gaze pressing down on him, an invisible tension hanging thick between them. "You wanted to see me, General." Ashton's voice was clipped, barely betraying his discomfort. The mission they had been handed was far from straightforward, but the conversation he had just had with Kyla had only intensified the questions swirling in his mind. Winters looked up, her expression unreadable. She tapped a few buttons on the data pad in front of her, and a new set of coordinates flashed up on the screen. The area on the map was near the southern front, heavily guarded by both Arcticonian and human forces. "We've been monitoring your interactions with the Arcticonian prisoner," she said coolly. "It seems there's a connection growing between you and Kyla." Ashton's eyes narrowed, his pulse quickening. He wasn't sure whether to be frustrated or uneasy. The general's words were careful, measured, but Ashton knew that look. The one that suggested she saw everything, knew everything. "You've been ordered to follow your directives." "I know that," Winters continued, "but there's a strategic opportunity here. Kyla is offering us valuable intelligence. The growing rapport between you and her could be leveraged to extract more information. I expect you to do just that." Ashton felt his stomach twist. The idea felt wrong on so many levels. He had always followed orders, but this was something else entirely. Winters' words lingered in the air, thick with expectation. It was more than just interrogation, it was manipulation. She wanted him to exploit the bond he was building with Kyla, to use it against her, to break her down until she revealed everything. "General," Ashton began, his voice low, hesitant, "you're asking me to use her trust. To exploit something personal. That's crossing a line." Winters' expression didn't waver. She was cold, calculating, her gaze never leaving his. "You've crossed plenty of lines in this war already, Commander," she said, her voice almost too calm. "And I expect you to do what's necessary to end it. We need Kyla's information, and we need it fast. The Arcticonians are unraveling. If we can use this connection to our advantage, then it's a small price to pay." Ashton's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles white beneath his gloves. The unease, the discomfort, simmered just below the surface, but he knew better than to argue further. Orders were orders. He had no choice but to follow through. The weight of his duty was always heavy, but this felt like a betrayal. Not just of Kyla, but of everything he had believed about his role in this war. Before he could speak again, a voice broke into his thoughts. "You have something to say, Commander?" Winters' tone was icy, her eyes narrowing. Ashton hesitated, then shook his head. He wasn't going to argue. Not now. Not with her. "Understood, General," he said, his voice devoid of emotion, but inwardly, a storm was brewing. The command center felt suddenly smaller, more oppressive. He stood, his body tense with a quiet anger that now boiled beneath the surface. Later that evening, in the dimly lit interrogation room, Ashton stood before Kyla. Her presence was commanding, even as she sat quietly on the metal chair, her hands still bound by the restraints, her eyes tired but sharp. The room was cold, sterile, the kind of environment designed to strip away any sense of comfort or peace. It was a far cry from the warmth of the shuttle, the only place where they had ever shared something resembling a real connection. Ashton hesitated at the doorway, the weight of General Winters' orders pressing against him like a physical force. His eyes flicked to Kyla, and he saw the faint lines of fatigue beneath her eyes. She looked tired, not just from the battle, but from everything she had endured. Everything she had been forced to become. The connection he had started to feel for her in the shuttle seemed distant now, drowned beneath the suffocating weight of duty and obligation. She looked up at him as he entered, her sapphire eyes studying him with a quiet, almost knowing expression. "What did they tell you to do, Commander?" Kyla's voice was soft, but there was an edge of wariness in it. She had seen the way he was looking at her, the shift in his posture. She knew the tension in the air wasn't just from the cold. It was from the weight of the command he had just been given. Ashton stepped forward, his feet feeling heavy against the cold floor. His fingers brushed against the edge of the chair, but he didn't sit. He stood there, his body rigid, eyes staring straight ahead. "I've been given an order," Ashton began, his voice hollow. "I need more information, Kyla. And General Winters she thinks you'll give it to me. By any means necessary." Kyla's face didn't betray any emotion at first. But then, she shifted slightly, her lips pulling into a thin, tight line. For a moment, she said nothing. The air between them was thick with the unspoken. The quiet accusation, the quiet realization. She knew where this conversation was heading. "I see," she said finally, her voice low. There was a quiet, bitter laugh that escaped her lips, one that didn't seem to reach her eyes. "So this is what it comes down to. My life, my words, my trust become a tool for your command." Ashton looked at her, his heart hammering in his chest. He had expected resistance. He had expected anger. But what he didn't expect was the way her eyes softened, just a little, as she looked at him almost as though she were pitying him. Pitying him for the choice he had been forced to make. "You think I'm here to be used," she continued, her voice tinged with sadness. "But you're not the only one being used, Commander." The words hit Ashton like a punch to the gut. He stiffened, his mind reeling. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Kyla's eyes met his. "I'm playing a game too, Commander Snow. My father, he sent me on a suicide mission. He sent me to die so that he could save himself. He's been using me, manipulating me. And now I'm just trying to outwit him. Outlast him. I have no loyalty left to him." Her words were like a razor's edge, cutting through the layers of war and duty that had clouded his judgment. Ashton stood motionless, absorbing the weight of her confession. Kyla wasn't just a pawn in a war she had no control over. She was a soldier, yes, but she was also someone who had been betrayed, used, and left with no choices but to play the same dangerous game her people had forced her into. Ashton swallowed, the guilt and the conflict that had been building inside him suddenly consuming him all at once. His hand gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. "You're playing a dangerous game, Kyla," he said, his voice barely a murmur. Kyla's eyes darkened, but there was no fear in them. Only acceptance. "You don't have to play it with me. But I hope, for both our sakes, you see the truth before it's too late." The small room they shared was dimly lit, the only sound the faint hum of the base's ventilation system, steady and unbroken. Kyla stood by the window, her eyes lost in the swirling snow outside. The blizzard had intensified, the landscape a blanket of white and gray, a chaotic dance of wind and ice. Inside, however, the silence between her and Ashton was almost peaceful. Ashton stood a few paces away, his back turned as he leaned against the wall, his eyes downcast. It was a rare moment of calm in the storm that had been their lives since this war began. Their shared experiences, their struggles, their pain had brought them closer, though neither of them dared to speak of it. Ashton's mind, ever the soldier, battled with a growing confusion in his heart. Kyla's presence, despite the alien nature of her being, was beginning to feel less like that of an enemy and more like someone who understood. Her pain was familiar to him. Her betrayal, her desire for survival, it echoed his own. For the first time since he had taken up arms for humanity, he was beginning to question what it all meant. Was this war truly just a fight for resources, for power? Or was it a game, one played by those who stood behind the curtains, pulling strings from the shadows? Ashton glanced at Kyla. She caught his eye and held it for a moment, an unspoken understanding passing between them. She was the daughter of a general who had sacrificed her, thrown her into the chaos to die, just as he had been sent to the front lines with no care for his own life. Both of them had been tools in a game that neither of them had ever chosen to play. Yet now, in the midst of everything, they found themselves standing together. Not as enemies, but as two warriors trapped in the same storm. A small, hesitant smile tugged at Kyla's lips. She didn't speak, but the warmth in her gaze conveyed a deep gratitude. Ashton felt it too, but he didn't know how to put it into words. For a long moment, they simply existed in the quiet, the sound of the blizzard outside muffling the noise in their minds. But it was only a moment of respite before the storm shifted again. The door to the room opened with a soft hiss, and Lieutenant Parker entered, his face taut with urgency. The calm in the room shattered immediately as Ashton straightened, his instincts snapping back into place. "Commander, we've got a problem." Parker's voice was tight, his usually composed demeanor cracking under the weight of the news he was about to deliver. "We've intercepted communication from the Frost clan. There's something going on, something big. They've been manipulating both our forces and the Arcticonians, playing both sides like pawns in a game." Ashton's eyes narrowed, and he stood up straighter. "The Frost clan." His voice was laced with disbelief. He had heard rumors of the Frost clan, a faction that operated in the shadows, but he had always dismissed them as nothing more than conspiracy. Yet now, the name rang in his ears like a bell, louder and louder with every passing second. "They are working with both humans and Arcticonians," Parker continued, his gaze shifting to Kyla, who stood by the window, her expression unreadable. "Their goal isn't victory for either side. They've been fueling the war, keeping the conflict alive, so they can gain something from both parties. We've been manipulated, Commander. And so have the Arcticonians." The weight of the revelation hung heavy in the room, the walls suddenly closing in around them. Ashton turned to Kyla, his mind racing. "You knew, didn't you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Kyla met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. "I suspected it," she said, her tone quiet but sure. "But I didn't have the evidence until now. The Frost clan's tactics, they've been using both sides to their advantage. And now they are planning something big. Something that could destroy everything." A cold realization settled over Ashton. The war, this bloody conflict, wasn't just about winning or losing. It wasn't just about the Arcticonians and the Terrans clashing in battle. The Frost clan had been pulling strings, feeding lies, and keeping both sides in the dark about their true intentions. And now, the consequences of their manipulation were coming to a head. "What do we do?" Ashton asked, his voice filled with urgency. His duty to humanity, to the Terran forces, clashed with the undeniable truth that Kyla had just revealed. He was caught between two choices: follow the path of his orders or join forces with Kyla, someone who had once been his enemy, to expose the Frost clan's manipulation. Kyla stepped forward, her posture firm, her eyes fierce with determination. "We have to expose them, Commander. If we don't, this war will never end. We can't let them keep playing us." Ashton's mind was racing, his thoughts a whirlwind of conflicting loyalties. His duty to his people, his mission seemed at odds with the growing trust he had for Kyla. But as the weight of her words sank in, he knew she was right. The war wasn't just about territory. It wasn't just about winning for one side. The Frost clan had twisted it all, and if they didn't stop them now, they would lose everything. "How do we expose them?" Ashton asked, the question heavy with doubt, but also with something else, a spark of hope. For the first time in a long while, he felt like there was a chance for something better. A chance to stop the endless cycle of violence. Kyla's eyes flashed with resolve. "We go after their leaders. We need to get to their base, and we need to do it quickly. If we wait any longer, they'll move on their plan." Ashton looked at her, his heart pounding in his chest. "You're sure we can trust each other, Kyla?" For a moment, she was silent, her gaze locked with his. She wasn't just asking for his trust, she was offering her own. This was it. The point of no return. "I'm sure," she said softly. This is our only chance to stop them. And with that, Ashton knew. There was no turning back. They had no choice now but to trust each other completely and expose the Frost clan for what they were. A dangerous alliance had formed between them, one forged from the embers of war and betrayal. And now, it would have to be enough. The dim light in the corridor flickered as Ashton walked the length of the hallway, his boots making a rhythmic echo against the metallic floor. He had just left General Winter's briefing, the weight of the mission pressing down on him, but his mind was elsewhere, caught in the whirlwind of doubts and choices that Kyla's revelations had brought. The war was not what it seemed. And now, he wasn't sure who to trust, his own command or the woman who had once been his enemy. The air around him felt colder than usual, and the silence was deafening. But then, a sudden disturbance shattered the quiet. A soft but distinct thud came from behind him. Ashton's hand instinctively reached for his sidearm, his senses on high alert. "Commander," a familiar voice called out, breathless and urgent. He turned sharply, his eyes locking with Kyla's. She was standing at the end of the hallway, her face pale but determined, a look of desperation written across her features. "Kyla?" Ashton asked, his voice low but steady, masking the surprise he felt. "What are you doing out here?" She took a step toward him, her wrists bound by the same energy cuffs he had seen on her earlier. But now, there was no fear in her expression, no hesitation. There was only urgency. "I had to warn you, Commander," she said, her voice strained. "There's a conspiracy inside your ranks. Someone in your command is working with my father's forces. They are trying to prolong the war. It's all part of a plan, and they'll do anything to see it through." Ashton's heart skipped a beat. He had suspected that there was more to this war than he had been told, but hearing this from Kyla, the enemy sent a chill down his spine. His instincts screamed at him to question her, to dismiss her words as another manipulation. But something in her eyes told him she wasn't lying. "Who?" he demanded, his voice sharper than he intended. "Who in my command? How do you know this?" Kyla's gaze flickered around the hallway, as if checking for unseen eyes, before she stepped closer to him. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I don't know who exactly, but I've been getting messages, coded communications from someone in your ranks. They've been feeding information to my father's forces, making sure the war drags on longer than it should. They've been manipulating both sides. The Frost clan isn't the only enemy we face." The weight of her words hit Ashton like a hammer. His mind raced, piecing together fragments of information that didn't make sense until now. Internal sabotage. Betrayal from within their own ranks. He had thought the worst of the war was already behind them, but this was something entirely different. Kyla stepped closer still, her voice trembling slightly. "They want to keep us fighting, keep us at each other's throats. If they can keep the war going, they can control everything, both human and Arcticonian forces." Ashton clenched his fists at his sides, torn between his duty to the Terran forces and the gnawing suspicion that Kyla was right. The evidence she provided, though circumstantial, lined up with things he had noticed but couldn't explain. But this was treason. How could he possibly reconcile that with what Kyla was telling him? He stared at her, his thoughts clouded by a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked, the question hanging in the air like a weight neither of them could escape. Kyla took another step forward, her eyes softening as she met his gaze. "Because I trust you?" The words were simple, yet they carried a weight far heavier than any weapon or armor could. Ashton felt the ground beneath him shift. Trust. That word, so fragile and so rare in the midst of war, resonated deep within him. The very thing he had been guarding against, the very thing he had denied himself, was now offered to him, willingly, from someone who had once been his enemy. The silence between them grew thick, like the air before a storm. Ashton swallowed hard, unsure of how to respond. He wanted to believe her, but doubt still lingered. "You expect me to believe you, Kyla? After everything? After what your people have done?" His voice cracked with frustration, the words coming out more harshly than he intended. How can I trust you when everything in me tells me I shouldn't? Kyla's eyes didn't waver. Her jaw tightened slightly, her lips pressed into a thin line as she took another step closer, her presence suddenly overwhelming in a small hallway. Because, Commander, she said quietly, I'm offering you something that my people never will. I'm offering you something that's not based on lies, not based on war. I'm offering you me. And I'm asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to trust that we can end this war together. Her words were like a dagger to his chest. Trust. It was the very thing that had eluded him for so long. The very thing that had caused him to close off, to lock away his emotions and focus only on survival. But now, standing here, with Kyla's words hanging between them, he realized that the battle for survival wasn't the only war he had been fighting. It was the war within himself, the war against trusting someone who had been his enemy, against believing that there could be something more than just the brutality of conflict. Their eyes locked, a silent understanding passing between them. And then, Kyla did something that stunned him. She stepped forward and placed a hand gently on his arm, her touch cool against his heated skin. The contact was simple, innocent, but it sent a shock through him, one that he couldn't ignore. I'm not manipulating you, Ashton, she said softly, her voice almost a whisper now. I'm not playing a game. I'm offering you my trust, my life, because I believe in something more than this war. In that moment, Ashton knew that something had changed between them. It wasn't just the mission. It wasn't just the war. It was the connection that had slowly been growing, the bond forged not in battle, but in shared understanding and pain. He had trusted soldiers, commanders, allies in the past. But this felt different. And, against every instinct that had kept him guarded for so long, Ashton found himself willing to believe her. But doubt still lingered, a shadow in the back of his mind. Was he falling into a trap? Was she truly telling him the truth, or was this all part of the game she had been playing? His thoughts were interrupted when Kyla's voice, low and steady, broke through the silence again. I'm willing to trust you, Ashton. Will you trust me? The question hung in the air, an invitation, a challenge, and the very thing that would decide the course of their fates. Ashton stared into her eyes for a long moment, his heart pounding in his chest. Slowly, carefully, he reached up, touching her hand lightly, as if to test the weight of her offer. There, in the warmth of that small gesture, he realized that he had already made his choice. I trust you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The sound of the alarm echoed through the cold, empty halls of the base, sharp and insistent, a reminder that the time for escape was running out. Ashton's heart raced as he turned to Kyla, her face set with determination. They were running out of time, and every second brought them closer to being caught. The surveillance systems would be rebooting soon, and when they did, the base's security would lock down, trapping them both inside. They had only a few precious minutes to make it out. Kyla's eyes flickered toward the control panel, the small light above it blinking rapidly, signaling that the system reset was imminent. Ashton nodded sharply, his mind already calculating the route they would need to take. His hand gripped the energy gun at his side, the weight of it a reminder of the danger that lay ahead. We've got one shot at this, Ashton said, his voice low but urgent. He could feel the sweat on his brow, the adrenaline beginning to build. Once the system resets, it'll be too late. Kyla gave him a quick, almost imperceptible nod, and then she turned, her movements fluid and swift. Despite the cuffs around her wrists, she moved with a grace and efficiency that left Ashton momentarily breathless. Her cool demeanor contrasted sharply with the tension that gripped his chest, and he found himself instinctively following her lead, trusting her in a way he hadn't expected. They slipped through the darkened corridors, their footsteps muffled by the thick, metallic floors. The base was a maze of tunnels and chambers, each one more sterile and impersonal than the last. But Kyla seemed to know the layout of the facility like the back of her hand. Her eyes flicked to the walls, calculating their next move, and Ashton could only follow in her wake, doing his best to keep up. Left here, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the noise of their own breaths. There's a maintenance hatch we can use. Ashton nodded, his pulse racing as they moved swiftly through the narrow hallways. The sound of the alarms grew louder, a constant reminder of the growing danger. Kyla's pace was unrelenting, fast, precise, and Ashton struggled to match her speed, his boots heavy against the cold metal. He had been trained for battle, for endurance, but this was something different. Kyla was built for this world, for the unforgiving landscape of Arcticon. Finally, they reached the maintenance hatch. Kyla quickly entered the access code, her fingers moving rapidly over the pad. The small door hissed open, revealing a narrow passageway that led them into the lower levels of the base. The air was cooler here, and the faint hum of machinery was the only sound that greeted them. They moved in silence now, knowing that any sound could alert the security teams to their presence. Every step was calculated, every motion deliberate. As they neared the exit, the wind outside grew fiercer, howling through the narrow gaps in the facility's outer walls. Ashton could feel the pressure building, the urgency of the situation making his every breath feel heavier. They were almost there, just a few more meters, and they would be free. Kyla led the way, her movements instinctive as she navigated through the rough terrain outside the base. The storm outside was brutal, the wind biting into their skin as snow whipped around them, creating a thick, white blur. Arcticon was unforgiving, a planet that demanded survival from its inhabitants, and even the most seasoned warriors were pushed to their limits here. Ashton staggered slightly, the cold air seeping into his bones, but Kyla moved with ease, her pace never faltering. She had been raised in this environment, she was built for the harsh, frozen world of Arcticon. Her every step seemed to cut through the snow with a natural grace that left Ashton struggling to keep up. The icy wind tugged at his clothing, making it harder to move forward, but he pushed through, determined not to fall behind. "Keep up!" Kyla called over her shoulder, her voice almost lost in the roar of the storm. Her words were sharp, but there was an edge of something else in them, concern, maybe? It was hard to tell, but Ashton didn't have time to dwell on it. He gritted his teeth and pushed forward, his breath visible in the freezing air. The blizzard intensified, reducing visibility to almost nothing. The snowflakes felt like needles against his skin, and the cold began to seep through his layers of clothing. Ashton's mind raced as he struggled to focus, the storm disorienting him, making everything seem distant and surreal. But Kyla remained steady, a beacon in the chaos, leading him through the tempest as if she had done this 100 times before. After what felt like hours of trudging through the blinding snow, they reached a small ice cave, an unexpected oasis in the middle of the storm. Kyla ducked into the entrance first, her figure barely visible against the whiteness of the world outside. Ashton followed closely behind, stumbling slightly as he entered the relative shelter of the cave. The cold wind cut off abruptly as the entrance closed behind them, leaving only the muffled sound of the storm outside. Inside the cave, the temperature was more bearable, though still frigid. The walls of the cave were smooth and translucent, as if carved from the very ice of Arcticon itself. The faint glow of the ice created an eerie, ethereal atmosphere, casting long shadows across the walls. Kyla sat down on a small ledge, pulling off her outer layers and taking a deep breath. Ashton leaned against the far wall, his chest rising and falling with the effort to catch his breath. The wind outside raged on, but in the safety of the cave, there was a strange stillness. They were both exhausted, but the danger wasn't over. They still had to figure out how to get off this frozen hellhole and stop the forces manipulating the war. But for now, in this brief moment of respite, there was only the shared silence between them, as silence that spoke volumes more than words ever could. Ashton glanced over at Kyla, noticing the way the cool glow of the cave highlighted the strain in her expression. Her face was drawn, her features softening with fatigue, but her eyes never lost their sharpness. She was still a warrior, still determined, despite everything she had been through. There was a quiet strength in her that Ashton couldn't help but admire. For a moment, their gazes met, and there was an unspoken understanding between them, one that had grown from the dangerous dance of trust and betrayal. Kyla had offered him her trust, and he had chosen to accept it. They were allies now, bound by something stronger than the war that had brought them together. In the heart of the frozen wilderness, with the storm howling outside and their futures uncertain, They both realized one thing: they were in this together. And that might just be the only thing that could save them. The icy winds howled around them as Ashton and Kyla trekked deeper into the cave system, their breath visible in the frigid air. Despite the cold, there was an urgent heat building between them, a sense of purpose that was palpable in every step they took. The deeper they ventured, the more the feeling of isolation settled in. The winding tunnels of Arcticon's underground world seemed endless, the shadows thick and heavy as they moved through the labyrinthine corridors. Kyla led the way, her eyes sharp, her movements fluid. Ashton struggled to keep up, his mind still racing from the revelations they had uncovered about the Frost Clan. The deeper they went, the more unsettled he felt. The presence of an ancient power source, something capable of destroying both human and Arcticonian forces, was too powerful to ignore. He had always known that the war was about more than just territorial control, but now, he was facing the possibility of a weapon that could change everything. They paused at the entrance of a large cavern, the air thick with the scent of something unfamiliar. The cavern was massive, stretching far beyond the range of their lights, and at its center was something that seemed to pulse with energy. An unnatural glow radiated from deep within the rock. Kyla turned to him, her expression grim but resolute. "This is it," she said softly, her voice carrying an edge of both awe and fear. "The Frost Clan has found it." Ashton stepped forward cautiously, the air crackling with an energy that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. The light from the cave's energy source was faint but unmistakable, a sickly blue-white glow that seeped from deep within the earth, filling the space around them with an eerie ambience. The energy was raw, untamed, like the heartbeat of the planet itself. But there was something else to it, something darker. "What is this?" Ashton asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What have they uncovered?" Kyla's eyes flickered toward the center of the cavern, where the light emanated most strongly. "An ancient energy source," she explained, her voice low with the weight of the revelation. "Something our ancestors discovered long before we ever knew how to harness it. It has the power to obliterate everything around it, human, Arcticonian, it doesn't matter. It's a force of nature. The Frost Clan knows this. They plan to use it." Ashton swallowed hard, his mind racing. But why? Why would they want to destroy everything? What do they gain from it? Kyla clenched her fists, her eyes hardening as she took a step closer to the glowing power source. "Because the Frost Clan doesn't want just to win the war. They want to rule both our peoples. They've been manipulating the war from the very beginning, playing us all for fools. They see this energy as a weapon they can use to wipe us both out and take control of everything." A cold silence fell between them. Ashton's mind raced with the implications. A weapon that could destroy everything he had fought for, everything his people had sacrificed. The Frost Clan wasn't just a faction, they were a deadly force capable of changing the course of history with one move. "How do we stop them?" Ashton asked, his voice low, filled with resolve. Kyla turned to face him, her expression focused, her eyes gleaming with the fierce determination that had drawn him to her in the first place. "We take control of the power source before they do. We infiltrate their stronghold and disable it. If we don't, they'll use it to annihilate both our armies and leave nothing behind. No peace, no future." Ashton studied her face for a long moment, the gravity of the situation settling over him. "Infiltrate? We're going up against a faction that's already infiltrated both sides. They control everything. The Frost Clan will be expecting us." Kyla nodded grimly. "I know. But we don't have a choice. The longer we wait, the more powerful they become. If we don't stop them now, the war won't matter anymore. Our people won't matter." Ashton's eyes met hers, and in that moment, there was an understanding between them, something more than just a battlefield, more than just strategy. This was about survival. This was about ensuring that both human and Arcticonian lives meant something beyond the endless cycle of war. "We need to move quickly," Ashton said, the words finally settling into a concrete plan. "We'll infiltrate their base, take out their security, and disable the power source. It's our only shot at stopping them." Kyla's gaze flickered to the shadows, her body tense. The Frost clan has too many eyes watching. We'll need to be invisible ghosts. They'll have their best warriors guarding the power source. But we have an advantage. What's that? Ashton asked, intrigued. Kyla's lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile. We know their weaknesses. The tension between them built as they began to plan their approach, each detail falling into place with careful precision. The urgency of the situation had forced them to move quickly, but neither of them underestimated the danger. The Frost clan was relentless, and their stronghold was fortified with layers of security designed to stop anyone who dared to challenge them. But Kyla and Ashton were different. They weren't just soldiers, they were survivors, and together, they had a chance to pull off the impossible. The storm outside was a reflection of the turmoil brewing within their hearts. Ashton and Kyla stood together in the shadow of the ancient power source, their minds locked in a shared goal. There was no turning back now. Their bond, forged in the crucible of war and betrayal, had become something more, something neither of them could deny. And as they prepared to move out, the weight of their mission settled over them both. The war had been about so much more than a battlefield. It had been about the choices they made, the trust they placed in each other, and the truth they were fighting to uncover. The stakes had never been higher, and now, the world itself rested on their shoulders. As they set out for the Frost clan's stronghold, the echoes of the storm outside seemed to match the storm within them, a world of uncertainty, of hidden enemies, and a fight for a future neither of them could have imagined just days before. The air was thick with anticipation as Ashton and Kyla crouched behind the rocky outcropping, their eyes scanning the entrance to the Frost clan's stronghold. The snowstorm outside had intensified, adding a layer of cover to their movements, but it also made everything feel more uncertain, more precarious. The entire base was buried deep beneath the surface, hidden from view by the planet's unrelenting icy grip. But this deep underground, with walls of ice and concrete, the danger was no less real. Kyla motioned for Ashton to follow her, and they began their approach to the entrance, moving with precision. Their training had prepared them for combat, for strategy, but this was different. This was a final gambit. There would be no more second chances after tonight. Their movements were quiet, almost ghost-like as they crept past guards stationed at various checkpoints. The security systems of the Frost clan base were formidable: automatic turrets, motion sensors, and patrols, but Kyla had already infiltrated them once before. The faintest trace of a smile tugged at her lips as she bypassed a series of security panels with the practiced skill of a seasoned operative. Ashton, staying close, couldn't help but admire her focus and grace. They made it to the main control room undetected, the heart of the Frost clan's operations, where the power source was located. It was a sprawling chamber, its walls lined with high-tech equipment that hummed with energy that could annihilate both human and Arcticonian forces if used improperly. Kyla moved to the central console, her fingers flying over the interface, quickly disabling the alarms. Ashton, standing guard, scanned the room for any signs of movement. His heart raced with each passing second. He knew they didn't have much time before the Frost clan's warriors realized they had infiltrated the facility. The power source, a massive crystalline structure, pulsed with blue-white energy in the center of the room. It was beautiful in its malevolence, a swirling storm of energy just waiting to be unleashed. It was the weapon they had feared all along. "We need to disable it," Ashton said, his voice low but urgent. He stepped closer to the control panel, ready to assist Kyla in whatever way he could. But she shook her head, her eyes focused on the console as she worked. "It's not just a switch, Ashton. It's tied into the entire system. We'll have to reroute the energy flow and deactivate the main power grid." "It's going to take both of us," she replied, her voice steady, despite the weight of the task before them. Ashton nodded, the full weight of their mission settling over him. There was no turning back now. They had come too far. They had crossed lines personally and professionally, but they were here together, and together, they would stop this nightmare. Just as Kyla inputted the final sequence, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the hall. Ashton's pulse quickened. "We're out of time," he muttered under his breath, his grip tightening on his weapon. Kyla didn't flinch, her expression unchanging as she finished the final command. The room seemed to hold its breath, and then the power source flickered. For a moment, it seemed to pulse brighter, as if reacting to their intrusion, but then, with a sharp hiss, the energy started to stabilize, dimming to a manageable level. Kyla exhaled, a deep breath of relief, but there was no time to celebrate. The Frost Clan's warriors were closing in, their heavy boots echoing down the corridor toward them. Kyla glanced at Ashton, her gaze intense. "We've disabled the weapon, but we need to get out now." Ashton didn't need to be told twice. He sprinted toward the exit, covering the rear as Kyla followed closely behind. The Frost Clan's soldiers appeared in the hallway just as they reached the outer door, weapons raised. The first shots rang out, the sound of energy blasts filling the air, but Ashton and Kyla moved as one, a synchronized, fluid unit that had learned to rely on each other through sheer necessity. Kyla fought with lethal precision, her movements a blur of grace and deadly intent. Ashton, ever the soldier, provided cover fire, his plasma rifle steady in his hands as he picked off their attackers one by one. The fight was chaotic, but they were unstoppable, driven by the same purpose, the same goal. As they reached the final checkpoint, the Frost Clan's forces regrouped, but it was too late. Kyla and Ashton had already reached the escape tunnel. "We're almost there," Ashton called, his voice tight with exertion, but his heart pounding with something else, something he hadn't expected. In the midst of battle, of saving their peoples, he felt an undeniable connection to Kyla. Something deeper than just survival. Something more. They reached the tunnel's exit, bursting out into the cold, harsh landscape of Arcticon's surface, the blizzard roaring around them. The storm seemed to match the chaos they had just left behind. Kyla glanced back at the entrance of the Frost Clan base, her eyes dark with determination. "We did it," she said, a hint of relief in her voice, but her expression was still focused. Ashton looked at her, his heart pounding not just from the battle, but from the realization that they had come through this together, truly together. Hours later, back in the safety of the Terran base, the aftermath of the battle settled like a thick fog between them. They had stopped the Frost Clan's plan, but the war wasn't over. Yet something had shifted between them. In the midst of the chaos, the bloodshed, and the destruction, Kyla and Ashton had crossed a line that neither could deny. As they stood side by side in the command center, surrounded by their respective forces, the world outside seemed quieter, less hostile. Kyla turned to Ashton, her expression softened, almost vulnerable in the quiet aftermath. "You didn't have to trust me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "but you did." Ashton's eyes met hers, and for the first time, the walls between them seemed to fall away. They weren't soldiers anymore. They were something more, something that had been forged through battle, through survival, through trust. "I didn't have a choice," he said, his voice gruff, but there was an undeniable warmth in his eyes. "You showed me what really matters, Kyla. Not just the war. Not just the battle. But us." A small smile tugged at Kyla's lips, and for a moment, the weight of the conflict seemed to lift. The war had ended, but their journey, their story was only just beginning. They had crossed lines, yes, but they had also found something worth fighting for. And now, together, they would see what the future held. And so, what began as a cold, brutal confrontation on the frozen battlefield evolved into an unlikely alliance. Commander Ashton Snow, a seasoned soldier hardened by countless wars, found himself questioning everything he thought he knew. Kyla Thalarin, an alien warrior from a defeated race, offered more than just her life. She offered the possibility of peace, a chance to end the bloodshed that had torn their worlds apart. As the days passed, their journey together became a blend of tense negotiations and growing trust, an alliance forged in the heat of conflict and tempered by the harshest of circumstances. They discovered not only the secrets of their enemies but also the deep connections that could bind even the most unlikely of allies. For Ashton and Kyla, the war was no longer just about victory, it was about survival, unity, and the hope of a future that neither of them had dared to dream of. But the story is far from over. The battle between their peoples rages on, and with it, The uncertain path that Ashton and Kyla must walk together, yet apart, as the forces that shape their worlds threaten to tear them apart. If you found yourself captivated by their journey, make sure to stay with us. The twists and turns of this intergalactic tale are only just beginning. What will happen next for Ashton and Kyla? Will their fragile alliance survive the growing tensions, or will they be pulled back into the chaos of war? Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell, so you won't miss the next chapter of this gripping saga. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Until then, keep your eyes on the stars. This story is far from finished.